Okay,
Costa
thank you.
Costa will be in the meeting. He will do the introduction. You can pose questions. And the presenter, I think, is not from Florida, but she will be sharing the screen, so you have access as well.
Okay, thank
We'll
you.
be sharing, yes, absolutely. Herman, do you have Mayor Sid already or not yet? No, I don't see him. He said that he was going to join.
No, he has to
Count-
join.
Okay, so, and Councilman Alvarez will not be joining us. Okay. Should I tell?
And we are live streaming in Facebook already.
I was gonna ask you, should we contact Laricel so that she starts already, or she did?
She gave us the okay. We are live streaming already.
Okay, thank you, Herman. This 7:30. We can start. We don't need quorum.
Okay, the Mayor C just joined.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Herman. We see you, Mayor.
Gina, we have everybody that I think we
Yes.
need. Just one, I think, would be Councilmember Dieguez. Have you heard from him?
Yes, he was joining us.
Okay.
He hasn't logged in, Herman?
No, he hasn't.
Give me 1 second. I'm texting him again.
All right. If everybody's okay with it, we'll give him a few minutes.
I know that I had spoken to Councilman Dieguez and he said he was going to join us, but he's not answering now. So maybe we can start so that we don't delay the workshop and the participants.
Mayor, give us the word on what you guys want to do with regard to starting. We're ready to go.
Yeah, let's give them another minute till 7:35, and then we'll go ahead and start.
Okay.
Councilman Dieguez is joining in.
Oh, perfect. He's joining. Got it.
Yeah.
Yes, give him 1 minute.
Councilman Dieguez, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Welcome.
All right, so we're ready to go, right? Let's begin with the workshop.
Herman, do we have anyone from the public, any participants that have logged in and want to participate and share their screen with us?
We have the consultants. They were here way in advance. We have two,
Okay.
I think, from the same consulting firm.
Okay.
Herman,
No
is
one-
Carlos Acosta, is he muted? Are you? No.
Yeah, he's coming out of the screen right now.
Any other?
I'm here ready to start whenever. I think do we got any public comments first?
Right. Anyone from the public, Herman?
No one from the public joined.
Okay, very well. Thank you.
Carlos, you're clear to go ahead and get us
Okay.
get us started.
All right. Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor and Council members. Carlos Acosta, Director of Public Works. With us here this evening is Elizabeth Treadway. She is a Principal Program Manager with Wood Environmental and Infrastructure Solutions. Shuk is here today as well from the same consulting firm. Before we get into her presentation, I wanted to give you a brief overview of our history, what led us to this evening's discussion on the stormwater utility fee. So in 2018, the Town Council approved a work order to Kimley Horn and Associates for the Stormwater Master Plan Update number 3. That plan was completed in May of 2019, and that same month, a workshop was held in Town Hall where we presented a summary of the findings and recommendations of the Stormwater Master Plan. A total of 11 drainage improvement projects were identified in the plan. Those capital projects and operations and maintenance costs were estimated in the plan around 20 million, over a 10-year plan. Following that workshop, the Town Council passed a resolution adopting the Stormwater Master Plan Update number 3 and incorporating those projects into the town's strategic master plan for prioritization and budgeting. While the town has been successful at obtaining grants to fund the recent stormwater improvement projects, the drainage projects identified in the latest master plan are unfunded. The current stormwater utility fee does not provide enough revenues to address the capital project needs identified in the plan in that 10-year cycle. Last year, around September, the Town Council passed a resolution approving a work order to Wood for the stormwater utility fee study. The purpose of the study is to determine an appropriate utility fee that would advance the goals of the stormwater program and accelerate the implementation of those stormwater capital projects, which brings us to this workshop tonight. Meetings obtain direction in guiding any changes in stormwater utility operation and financial policy. We have provided a draft report, and Elizabeth will supplement this report with her presentation. This is not the final report, and following your input tonight, staff will come back at a later date with a final report and recommendations on changes to that rate. Without further ado, and barring any initial questions, I would like to pass it on to Elizabeth to begin the presentation.
Good evening. This is Elizabeth Treadway. delightful to join you. This is quite an experience we're all going through, I think, in the way in which we're sharing information. I'd like to share my screen. I assume, Herman, that I'm able to do that now?
Yes, you should be able.
Okay, let's see if it all goes well. That's not the screen that I would want you to see. Can you tell me what you do see? Since I can't tell.
We're
We
seeing
see
your
the PowerPoint.
screen.
Do you see the PowerPoint now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. It's always interesting to me how these things play out as we're working through them. I, again, appreciate the opportunity. It's certainly not the way that we would like to be able to introduce ourselves to you. I have been with the company for 20 years. Almost unusual, I found, in the consulting business that anyone stays that long with a single company, but I've been very blessed with working with the Wood team and certainly with all of the communities that I serve. I'm a former public works director. And so for my first career in working in local government, I was on the public side of executing this work and joined the company again 20 years ago. And I've had the privilege of supporting communities across North America. I have clients that I've worked with throughout the United States and Canada and continue to enjoy everything I do. So it's delightful for me to be able to be with you this evening and to give you some background information to make the report perhaps a little more alive, help you understand the process that we followed, and most importantly, to start the process of gaining your feedback and understanding on critical priorities and the policy issues that are really important to resolve as we go forward. I do believe Carlos has already done our introduction, so I will take us straight to the process that we've used over the last, what is now about 7 months. The work is really focused around gaining an understanding. I work very closely with both elected officials and the professional staff of our communities that we serve. And the approach that we take is one that is to involve ourselves in understanding your history, the history of the stormwater program, what your goals and objectives are, to really appreciate what the community's values are around managing your infrastructure, and identifying through the process of that background research to understand then what are the goals, what are the things that you want to achieve going forward, how this system is managed, how it contributes to the sustainability of your community, and to prioritize then things that need to go forward. That information is then fed in through myself in developing a financial model that allows us to forecast the future based on various factors, both financial factors and program factors, to establish what the true cash demand is in order to accomplish the goals and objectives. As Carlos and his team and I have been working, we have come to an understanding, I think, of critical objectives, but we really do have some important policy discussion that we need your input and consideration on. And we'll talk about what those things are. So I said one of the first things I like to do in working with our communities is really understand goals. And so at this point, the methodology used the process of immersing myself and our team into understanding the general operation and objectives of the community. We've recognized some critical factors that are important in establishing your goals. Things that are happening within the system that you have a desire to, the community has needs for, to address things like erosion that's occurring in the swales. One of the things we certainly understand in the stormwater business worldwide is the erosive nature of stormwater and its ultimate then contribution to degrading water quality. So understanding how that dynamic happens was certainly a part of the work that was done in your master plan. And we know that that is an element of moving forward to protect and sustain the water quality within the community as well. As you can see just by the picture that's on the screen and those that we provided in the report, flood protection is an important community value. It's important that the citizens, businesses of your community have a reasonable expectation of the protection and reduced risk to their property, to their livelihood, to their lives, and understanding how to address flood protection, flood mitigation. What are the causes? What's happening behind the scenes? And we certainly understand through the master plan some very significant investment that needs to be made in this infrastructure, but there are ongoing daily operational issues as well. You have a beautiful tree canopy, and I'm sorry I'm not there with you to enjoy it, but I certainly do understand that it is an asset to your community. Unfortunately, to the drainage system, it can be quite challenging because it results in the movement of leaf and green organic debris carried by stormwater into your catch basins and pipes, ultimately causing blockage, causing degradation to water quality. So it's one of those things that we're very sensitive about, and recognizing that getting performance deficiencies addressed is part of addressing the flood protection strategies. And so part of our program recommendations as we've worked with staff will really focus on those kinds of activities. We also talked to staff about what kind of programmatic goals are out there just in general management and operation of the infrastructure. And you have a permit that you share with Miami-Dade County, issued initially through the federal government, established in 1990, that we refer to in the industry as a municipal separate storm sewer system discharge permit. Long acronym that EPA was able to get into, an MS4. And so the jargon of our industry is to refer to that permit as an MS4 permit. It is the right to allow stormwater that moves through your system to discharge to waters of the United States. And so it's important that the terms of that permit be met. One of those terms focuses around your street sweeping program. And we worked with staff to really isolate what objectives should be achieved. That's one of the areas that you'll see that we've identified as a potential improvement from a performance perspective. We also know that there are general capacity restrictions on the system that are really day-to-day maintenance and operation impacts. And so part of the program that I analyzed and built a future model for will address those kinds of things. But we also have some financial goals that I talk with staff about. And one of them, as Carlos mentioned, the challenge of a capital program that is in your master plan is always difficult. And those of us in the industry really don't like to see master plans written and sit on a shelf. They really are important research and understanding in how to improve performance. And so funding those becomes quite the challenge. And so in working with staff, one of the things that we talked about was being able to leverage, as you have in the past, available outside resources through grants. whether they're grants coming through the federal government at the state level, through your legislature in a direct appropriation. But often those grants require a local match. And to be competitive, we have seen that those resources are more difficult to achieve, and some of those local match goals are moving up in the 50% of project value range. Sometimes those can be matched with in-kind services, like doing the engineering and design work. Other times it really is a commitment of cash to the capital construction. And so one of the objectives that we established in the model that I put together was to dedicate an annual appropriation that would address those engineering pressures, being able to do that design, getting ahead of putting a project out on the street. But most importantly, to ensure that available grants you can be competitive with by having the financial resources in place to move forward. Another financial objective that I talked to staff about was being able to have a reserve, an operating reserve in place that could address an immediate failure in the system, where capital programs are long range typically, thinking outward and typically significant in value. We also run into minor repairs that can crop up that are important to address immediately. And sometimes we know to plan for those, and obviously other times we don't. And so establishing an emergency fund is another financial tool that you can use, and certainly one that we really would like your perspective on how to manage this going forward. The program enhancements that I built into the cost model that's on the last page of the report address things like general repairs. Currently in the budget, there's a $25,000 line item, I believe is the number. I've projected increasing that to $90,000 a year to give you enough cash on hand to be able to mitigate in the short term those kinds of minor repairs. They're not capital projects, things that can prevent having to do a major repair in the future. And so I've taken that proposed cost to $90,000 starting in fiscal year 2021. One of the other things that we talked about was this increase in the meeting the objective in your MS4 permit on street sweeping. You're currently budgeting $35,000 for that program, and you get as many lane miles swept as you can out of those dollars. I discussed with staff changing that perspective to what is your goal? What does the permit require of you? And what does that cost? Not how much can you purchase for the $35,000, but what is your true operational goal that is driven by the permit? And in that case, that translated to adding an additional 45 lane miles of street sweeping and increasing that cost from $35,000 to $60,000. And that, again, is put in the model to achieve an annual goal that would allow you to sweep a little over 100 lane miles of street line within the town. One of the things that's been identified through the work that you do with Miami-Dade County and the work that's done statewide in water quality testing is to identify the degradation in Canal C8, the Biscayne Bay Canal, and the need to see improvement in that canal, and to focus on how to increase overall general condition of water quality. The other enhancements we've talked about, the street sweeping program, the improvement in general repairs of the infrastructure, financing capital projects, is all leading to improving the overall water condition in the canal. What we'd like to do is to see that those improvements occur before the state steps in with harsher mandates on the way in which both your program is run and the goals of improving water quality in the canal can take place. And so the more we can proactively improve system performance by cleaning the system more frequently, by sweeping more lane miles of street, by ensuring that minor repairs can be addressed, the less likelihood that the state becomes the driver of how you spend your money and how you focus your future. When we talk about flood mitigation, being able to clean the system more frequently, removing blockages, getting the vegetative material out of catch basins, being able to increase the performance and your general capacity of being able to do general O&M on things like inlets and the pipe system gives you the ability then to target where are those blockages, what's creating nuisance flooding, what is the right priority then for investing in your capital projects. How can ongoing maintenance and operation ultimately improve overall system performance? And so one of the things that we've talked with staff about is the possibility of adding a second cleaning crew. You currently have 2 dedicated staff. I built a program model that would double that. You'd add 2 additional staff. This is also one of those places where we really need your feedback. This is an opportunity where you could outsource that, test the reliability, be able to understand what the overall impact is before you make the decision to bring in additional staff and to purchase the equipment supporting costs necessary to do that. But I built the cost model with additional staff so that you could see what the potential burden would be if that would be your option versus outsourcing that. One of your MS4 permit requirements is that you do a pollutant loading study. This is basically analyzing how much non-stormwater, things that should not be entering the natural system, is coming from your stormwater infrastructure. So understanding how much pollution is carried by stormwater directly from the drainage system into receiving waters is a mandate in your permit. I have put in the model a one-time cost for that study to be accomplished so that you can meet the terms of your permit. The capital funding strategy is another one of those things we really need your advice and guidance on. So there are a number of options of using bonds for those very large projects, of establishing additional resources annually to address the engineering, design, grant matching, being able to move forward in a way that you can handle this capital program in a reasonable prioritization rather than allow the system failures to occur, but to get ahead of it. And so we're going to talk about and get your advice and guidance on what that strategy ought to look like. There is this is on page 7 of the report, that is the cost model that was developed that incorporates both the master plan numbers as well as your current capital improvement program and additional new projects that staff have identified. When you look at $15.12 million, that's a significant investment. So understanding an effective capital program strategy will be very helpful in ultimately determining if there should be then an adjustment in the rate structure. The master plan itself analyzed what would happen to the rate if you cash funded these projects. Just for the capital portion, it would cost in the range of $8 a month just for capital. Your current rate is $4.50 a month for your billing unit. It would almost double just to take the capital program. not to address any other part of your program. So if you put your current program with your capital program, you're talking about tripling, quadrupling the rate on a monthly basis if you were trying to cash fund your capital. We know that you've been very successful with grants. We know that those opportunities at this point are still there. So being able to continue on your grant approach, perhaps using debt when a very large significant project priority is looming and really needs to be addressed, is another strategy that we really need your guidance on whether that should be in the mix of solutions for the capital program. So I've gone through this pretty quickly, but I want you to really have an opportunity to think about these kinds of issues, and I'm going to go over them and step back to what I've just been talking about for the last 25 minutes, and we're going to talk about some policy things. In the report, I did a financial assessment of your current rate. Establishing a rate that's unchanged for 16 years really erodes the purchasing power of the revenue coming in for stormwater. Just using the U.S. data on the impact of inflation over those 16 years, the purchasing ability of a $2004 in today's terms is about 71 cents. So you've lost about 30% of that purchasing capacity. So understanding that there are policy decisions about your rate that we're going to talk about, not holding that rate set for so many years, recognizing that you've done the engineering work to do the analysis on the infrastructure, you have the knowledge of what priorities are out there, how then should that rate be managed? And we're going to talk about rate policy in just a minute. But the first really operational decision around maintenance of the system is that concept of outsourcing. You have the ability, and you use outsourcing now. Your sweeping program, for example, is outsourced. You outsource to Miami-Dade County through operating agreements a number of program elements on the water quality side, on canal maintenance, on your water quality monitoring. So outsourcing is something that you have effectively used in the past, and you, again, have the opportunity to use outsourcing as a test anytime that you want to really look at how do we improve some of these performance measures that are ongoing within the stormwater program. Being able to establish effective goals for performance, sustaining your National Flood Insurance Program CRS rating, you're at a 6. That's outstanding. That's a 20% reduction in flood protection for your community. Certainly an important element to sustain. It takes a number of your departments and operations to protect that rating. Whether you would want to improve it is certainly a goal that ought to be open for discussion. Again, meeting those performance goals in your permit, being able to make sure that your pollutant loading study is done, that your sweeping program is optimized, that you're staying ahead of Canal 8 is an important point for your understanding and for your input back to Carlos and the team. And then the idea of community expectations. The kind of flooding that we're seeing not only in your community, but as rain events and the intensity of storms have been transforming over the last 20-25 years, we know that there is an expectation of risk management, of ensuring community protection, of sustaining quality of life in your community, and appreciating from your perspective and your vision what that expectation and responsiveness should be is really important before any decisions are made in going forward. And then the additional, go ahead and move. Please slide, move. There we go. The additional impacts of policy on the rates themselves. So I talked about establishing a reserve. I've talked about the stability of the rate itself. I've talked about ensuring that you have available cash on hand to commit to receipt of grants, the potential use of debt financing in your capital program. All of these things ultimately lead to my being able to finalize and offer what a rate recommendation might look like. There is a cost model and again a rate projection in the report itself, but your input on these kinds of things are so critical in our ability to move forward. So appreciating that in the rate stability discussion, for example, you can peg the rate to a moderate increase every year. You can establish a stability standard that the rate will stay stable for 3 years, 5 years. I mean, it's variable. I think I use 3 years in the model. Or you can allow the rate to float wherever the rate needs to go. If the rate needs to increase this year, it's increased. In the next fiscal year, if it can be reduced, it's reduced. I don't recommend that approach, and from my perspective of doing this for decades now, uncertainty in cost that you pass on to, that you need to generate revenue for, to our business industries, communities, your residents, knowing that it's predictable for their own budgeting, for their own stability. I certainly don't recommend that a rate just float with wherever it might be from year to year. That doesn't mean that there aren't times that rates can be adjusted downward, but it would be based on principles that you would want to establish as a part of the rate model itself. So these are the kinds of topics that I've now spoken long enough, and really would, I know Carlos is equally interested in understanding how you might give direction to us in moving the program forward. So I'm going to stop talking and see if we can create some thoughtful dialogue.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate it very much. At this point, I will open for discussion, and Elizabeth and I will, if you have any particular questions on the information presented or in the report, we could clarify, but definitely looking forward to your feedback on a lot of these policy discussions.
I'll
sorry,
break the ice.
I didn't hear the last thing. You're opening it up for us? Is that what you said? Okay, go ahead, Councilman Collazo. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, I'll break the ice. You know, one of the things that I've seen continuously is, you know, that community standard that you spoke to about the residents, and I think you showed some of the most impactful pictures there when we have severe flooding in some of our neighborhoods. With that being said, you know, an ask of significant money couldn't come at a worse time, right? Couldn't come at a time where our financial future as a town is uncertain, and come to think of it, most of our residents' financial stability right now is probably uncertain as well. So as I heard you discussing in the dialogue, what I was looking at is where could our dollars, our current dollars, make the biggest impact, at least in mitigating some of those most egregious pictures that you were showcasing. At least, you know, when you see everybody's front yards flooded, when you see water, the water line creeping up into people's garages. And I know several of my colleagues have literally been out there during these flood events and have had to address these concerns with the residents. So my point of emphasis was really on how, where can our dollars be maximized to make the greatest amount of input. I'll continue listening to the dialogue from here on.
Carlos, do you want to take that first? My reaction to that comment, as most flooding that you see especially in neighborhoods, it is a direct response from the system's inability to carry the flow. Now that's usually a two-pronged problem. One, the rain comes down either faster than the system can handle or in greater quantity than the system can handle, but often caused because the system itself is not at its optimal flow capacity. So it is a matter of a maintenance issue, and it's a matter of those minor repairs. Now, ultimately, there are constraints. There are parts of your system that will take those larger capital dollars to really open its capacity. But in the short term, optimizing the system's performance through your operations programs for minor repairs and system maintenance, cleaning, ensuring that the pipes network are open and flowing, it is probably, again, in the short term, the area of emphasis. And Carlos, I certainly would welcome your thoughts on that as well.
Elizabeth, this is Ed Peterman, the town manager. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good, good. But ultimately, and I guess this goes to the point of the heart of the question that Councilmember Collazo just laid out. It's, will the present level of funding, if we do different things with it, or if we do things differently with it, can it improve with the current level of funding, whether it's operational or capital improvement?
I think if you were able to successfully obtain resources from a capital improvement perspective, those are the larger dollar projects that are often very impactful. The difficulty is the amount of investment that's necessary. It's so significant. Your $4.50 per month billing unit charge is not generating revenues for you to be able to implement that capital program. Not at all. When you look at your operating budget, there isn't any fluff sitting there for certain. That's someone who's been doing this work for 36 years now. You have a lean budget. You truly do. Your staff is doing and optimizing everything they can with the resources they have. Could there be priority shifts? Again, I would certainly defer to Carlos's thinking on what could be shifted. When I look at where the resources you generate around $1 million a year, where it's currently being spent, there's not a lot of flexibility there to reprogram, but certainly from the long-term perspective.
And I guess that goes to the heart of my question, right? That's probably a threshold decision or analysis or epiphany that we, I think, need to make. That the current level of funding, we can rearrange the pieces however we want, but it's not really going to dramatically improve our current state. I guess that's really what I'm asking you is, does that point make sense to you? Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that?
I agree that you are optimizing everything you can right now out of the budget that's provided. You have mandates that have to be met, and so those mandates are important. The last thing you need is to put your system in jeopardy and your community in jeopardy for violating water quality requirements within your permit, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Elizabeth have stated and what the manager is also alluding to. Our stormwater budget is very lean. If to give you an example, if we were to increase the level of service of street sweeping, or perhaps we'll take that service for example, that means that you're taking from somewhere else. Most of the money that is after your normal operation budget goes to match grants that are stormwater. So if you have those projects, you don't have a whole lot of flexibility because that money has to go to that capital year to match those grants. So there isn't a whole lot of flexibility. We could, like I said, increase 10, 15 extra lane miles. If for that particular year, we don't have a capital project, and we could, but the way our program runs is we have to put aside that money in order to match grants on X year, because there isn't too much flexibility in the program.
And Carlos, let me ask a question, and I ask it out of ignorance. The $15 million 10-year plan that Elizabeth highlighted on one of her slides, that really is that doesn't solve every single flooding problem on every single street in the town, right? That's just what we have programmed in the latest revision of the Stormwater Master Plan, right? Those are the most pressing areas that we have programmed to try and resolve over the next 10 years. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's correct.
So there are other projects that are not there that still may be problematic streets that still are going to flood. And 10 years from now, we're still going to have streets that may go into the subsequent Stormwater Master Plan revision that will be a decade from now.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Manager. And it addresses capital projects. That Stormwater Master Plan addresses new capital projects in those areas that are, we know as hotspots. We're not even talking about how do we improve an outfall, or before it reaches the outfall into a lake, how do we improve that structure there to keep contaminants from going into so those are other minor improvements that we're not even addressing with that directly affect the water quality, whether it's in the CA Canal or in other lakes. That master plan is just new capital projects in all these areas that are subject to recurring flood.
If I may ask a question? Thank you. Is there any way that we can select these projects and generate a fee associated with that project? Like, say we decide that there's this area that needs improvement and we're going to run with that project in the next coming year. Can we establish a fee to cover the cost of that project, whereby we are telling the residents, you're going to have another $2 on your bill every month because we're going to fund this particular project, that we can attach a dollar amount to a project one at a time? Is that something that can be done?
Elizabeth, do you want to answer that in terms of?
I don't think I'm muted, right? Am I muted? No.
No.
The size of the projects that are in the report, that are in the master plan, they're from 300,000 to 2.8 million. When you look at the rate of revenue generation that would be required to try to create the cash flow for just one project, would really have your rate significantly volatile, right? So 1 year, yes. To take a $1 million project, you're talking about doubling. Think about it now. You raise 1 million a year, a little bit more, but barely a little more. If you had $1 million project, you would double the rate for 1 year in order to generate that $1 million. If it's a $2 million project, you would have to triple the rate because you have an ongoing program plus the new project. So the $4.50 per month per billing unit charge now is creating that $1 million. That's allocated. Those are not large dollar investments that are being made with that. When you look at your line item budget, there's not this big outstanding, we could shift and not do that and replace it with a project. So if you look at just the capital of what it would take to generate enough revenue for $1 million project, and the Royal Oaks project that's listed on in the master plan is $1 million project sitting out there right now in FY21. It would take your rate to $9 in order to get the cash flow to fund that project. Just that one project.
So you're recommending that we incur debt, that we just establish a flat rate so that we can fund these as we can?
The approach that we built in was to establish an ongoing $500,000 increase of revenue that would be focused on capital. It would be used for engineering, design, permitting requirements, as well as for you to negotiate for grant funding in those large projects so that your local match is appropriated. You can show to the grantor that those funds are there, that you have the ability to leverage for those funds. It goes a long way in getting support at the grant level when they know that you have dedicated revenue on hand. It also can be, for one of your smaller projects, the actual cash on hand needed. You have a number of smaller projects that are in the $300,000-$400,000 range that money could certainly be accessible to. So we put that fixed dollar amount on an annualized basis be established to dedicate to allow you to focus on the capital program. The really large $3 million project is a candidate for debt. I mean, it's a one-time, very unusual, difficult to put enough external funding methods together to get $3 million to do something of that size.
Okay, so we would raise the rate to, let's say, $6.75, and that would be the new flat rate. And that's 50% more than what we're charging now to generate that extra $500,000 per year.
Yes.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Sure.
Elizabeth, and one quick question. It also takes in consideration the replacement of the truck. I know currently we do not hold any reserve to replace that back truck, 4 years or 5 years. Does that rate includes that as well?
Yes, it does. It includes the replacement of your existing back truck.
What happened? She dropped the new toy in the pool. What's the new toy? In the room.
Mr. Vice Mayor, I think your mic's on.
I'm sorry.
With that, I'd like to be recognized to ask a few questions, if I may. Mr. Vice Mayor. I'm going to presume that I can't see him, so I'm going to presume that he's saying it's okay.
I'm here. I'm trying to get the video to start. I don't know what's going on.
Okay.
I have some questions. All right. It says that the host has to open the video for me. I've tried several times. There it is. Okay. So I had a couple questions, and of course, some of this information is concerning. But the most important question that I had was you said something about revenue loss of power or power source by keeping the rate the same for so many years. I didn't understand quite what that concept was.
So the purchasing power of $1 today is not the purchasing power of $1 in 2004 rates were set.
Okay.
That purchasing power is eroded by, the basic concept of inflationary pressure on the cost of goods, things like the cost of benefit packages, the cost of salaries, the general resources that are necessary, that are within your current budget. You lose, and it's eroded annually. And so I simply use the statistics for your area from the United States government that maintains all this information.
I understand.
Okay.
Yeah. So, a dollar doesn't buy you the same today as
No.
it did 10 years ago. So that's
Exactly.
basically what you're showing. Okay.
Exactly.
And then your comparison of outsourcing versus in-house, and I heard Carlos say that we're in need of a new truck. Not just that we're in need of a new truck, but if we in-house, we'd have to have a second unit. So that would make it 2 trucks that we would need if we had a second crew, which was one of your recommendations. Outsourcing a second unit or getting it in-house.
Right.
But we don't have the revenues in there. And then a couple of things you said about the float rate. I first liked the concept when you stated the float rate, but then after understanding what you were saying about the float rate, that it could be a dangerous game, because basically it becomes a roller coaster year to year depending on our needs.
Well, it does for your community, and when businesses are writing up their own budgets, when households are dealing with it, having predictability is so much easier for them to adjust and deal with these costs than to not know from one year to the next whether the rate and their cost and their contribution to that is going to go up or down.
Right. So I got that out of the way. So the last question I have, and the last concern, I heard what Councilwoman Ruana was saying in reference to the rate and going 50% more. But our rate increase versus grants, we've been using grants and then just keeping a low rate. With this economic downturn, we don't know what the grant picture or forecast is going to be for the next several years. So my concern is, A, we have to meet a minimum standard that's required by law, and we're just right there. And then B, we have a lot of issues that need to be addressed in reference to future water projects and major flooding that we have, especially in the Royal Oaks area. It's something that needs to be discussed in reference to the rate. And we're talking about our rate right now, you said was $250 a month?
$4.50. $4.50 per billing unit. Yeah.
Per billing unit. Okay. When you say billing unit, you mean per home?
Per home, it is.
We get billed every 3 months.
It is for a household. It is $4.50 a month. For non-residential properties, it is a multiplier. So the impervious area on a property has been measured. There are so many billing units assigned to each of those non-residential properties, and their billing unit is then $4.50 times the number of units on their property. But for a home, it is $4.50 a month.
Right. Okay. Excellent. So yeah, I mean, I am concerned because at $450, we're barely making a little bit higher than $1 million. And it's going to cost us just to do one project $2 or $3 million. We have an issue. We have a concern, and we really need to address how we mitigate this, especially as we go into more flooding and more intrusion into the system as it comes further west. We know what's happening in the beach, and we see that the salt intrusion is coming more and more into our canals. So it's a big issue as more building happens around us, not necessarily our building, but other communities around us. There's going to be let me put it this way. There's going to be less drainage in those areas, and maybe putting more drainage onto those canal systems that we currently have. So I don't know if that's going to affect the aquifer and how much water we can get into those drains. So we definitely need to look at some options here, and that's it for me. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Mayor,
Yes, sir.
may I be recognized to?
Sure. I thought the mayor is with us, but yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. He's currently muted, and I can't see.
No problem. I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Just had a few questions, and I guess this one would go more toward the town manager. Our current reserves, I guess the unassigned reserve balance, that can be used to fund any emergency repairs that we need to make to any system, correct?
I mean, it could be used for whatever you guys as a policymakers decide we need to use it for. But obviously there's a minimum we have to have, and we used to have 15%, and now with the measure that was passed, that you sponsored, whatever it was a couple of months ago, we have to have at least 20%. So it would be anything over that 20%, and that would be, I guess, disposable or available for reallocation.
And the 20% reserves, that could be used though if we had like an unforeseen capital improvement, correct?
Yes, I mean, the 20% is there for rainy days, right? For we get hit by a hurricane, we have something like some catastrophe. That's what it's there for. But yes,
Okay.
It's a policy decision.
Okay, and I guess this question is it's two questions, and it's I guess for either Carlos or Ms. Treadway. Regarding the MS4 permit study, how often does our permit require that study be conducted?
It's a one-time study. Your pollutant loading study. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so if I understood your presentation correctly, we don't have one, or we need to update it, or?
You don't have one, right, Carlos?
Yeah, we don't have one.
Right.
We don't have one. We need to perform one.
Okay, and how much is that study?
I think I budgeted $50,000. It's a model. It's a financial. I mean, it's a performance model that's established. It's based on rain data. It's based on sampling and condition and your water quality data. It's a data-hungry model that predicts your loadings for various storm events based on pipe capacity and discharge flows out of the system as to what pollutants are coming into the system.
Okay, but approximately, give or take in your experience, it'll be about $50,000.
I think that's a reasonable value for the work to be done.
Okay, thank you. And more of a broad question to either Carlos or the manager. The money's generated by this particular fee, it's restricted to stormwater related projects and salaries, of course, correct?
Yeah, the salaries that are paid out of it are stormwater related. It's for the two gentlemen who run and manage the back truck, which is all part of the stormwater process.
But like an impact fee, it is restricted to only those sorts of related expenses.
Yes.
Okay. And getting to the end of my line of questions here, regarding the 83rd place project, which was a project I believe that Councilwoman Ruano brought to our attention when those residents were submitting photos and came to us. I know that both she and I have visited that area, and it's really, really bad at times. How come it's so far out into the future on our estimated timetable? Is that just because of the timing of when it was added, or was there another reason why it was pushed out to fiscal year 28, 29?
Yeah, I think I could answer that. That the 83rd place project, there's a number of projects that were added, Councilmember Dieguez, after the stormwater master plan was completed. There was 83rd place. There's another street around 79th Avenue and 159th Street and so forth. Our goal was that when we get to original intent was that when we got to the strategic plan workshop, that all these capital projects were presented, that the council can prioritize these projects along with the other projects in the strategic master plan. I know the strategic plan workshop has been pushed a little, but that was our intent, that we, before we finalize the rate, that all these projects were prioritized so that they could go into the final model.
Thank you, Mr. Director. I'd like to see that project moved up in timeline. At least that would be some of my initial feedback as to that. I mean, of course, like you said, we'll have a more thorough discussion later about it. But I'm sure at least a good chunk of my colleagues would be in agreement that that's a project that we should probably consider moving up given the particular factual circumstances surrounding it.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So,
Yes.
so yeah, if we can do that, that'd be great. Then my last question has to do kind of as a follow-up to the discussion that Ms. Treadway had with Councilwoman Ruano about the 500, give or take the $500,000 that is being suggested that we raise at a minimum. Well, let me start from there. Is that my understanding, Ms. Treadway, of your recommendation that we should at least increase our yearly revenue from this source by about $500,000?
Oh, that is in the capital program. If we talk, I'm pulling up the rate model. The first increase would be about $700,000.
Oh, okay.
500 of that is in the capital program.
Okay, and the other 200 was for like matching grants and whatnot?
It was to address some of these increases in your ability to do minor repairs, to increase the street sweeping program itself. They're much more minor targets, but multiples of them. It's not just one thing. It was to enhance your responsiveness in managing the system.
So within that 700,000, that you were also, or that number contemplates the 90,000 in reserves, correct?
It contemplates 140,000 in reserves, actually.
Thank you. And so with the 700,000 number going off of that report right now, then that would cover the vac truck replacement needs, the flexibility for matching grants, the capital improvement needs, the permit study, and the reserves at the 140,000, correct?
The vac truck replacement is programmed 4 years out. It's 8 years old now. Staff estimated it having a 12-year life. And so it is out in 4 years, 4 fiscal years out. in the overall cost model as I originally developed it.
Thank you, Ms. Treadway. I don't have any other questions at this time.
In terms of, oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Mr.
No. Anybody else?
Yeah, I wanted to be recognized.
Good.
All right. So, Ms. Treadway, I think you had mentioned that this rate has been stagnant since 2003. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
So I think that's why it's sort of catching us all, right? It may seem like a large increase, but if you were to have gradually increased this rate since 2003, it would be very insignificant increases over a long period of time, right? That's how this should have been done.
That certainly would be the outcome had you done, if that policy had been adopted, yes.
Right. So, and when you mentioned the vac truck, I think you had mentioned that the current budgeting model has an additional truck, a second truck.
It does.
That's outsourced.
In this case, I priced it as if you were purchasing it and adding 2 additional staff so that you have a basis of comparison, so that Carlos could go to the marketplace and test whether there is an outsource that would be willing to provide this service. That is not necessarily something that might be readily available. I don't know the marketplace well enough to say that there is capacity in your marketplace for someone to come forward, provide the necessary equipment and personnel, but it certainly would give Carlos the position to be able to do that and know what the cost would be should you in-house that service.
Right. So I like to break things down individually, right? So for a household, this monthly rate we're talking about, the increase for this fiscal year, whenever we implement this, is a $2.20 increase per month.
Yes.
Okay. And when does that go up again in your modeling?
In 4 fiscal years out, it goes to it goes to $7.50.
Okay, and that is based on what, assumed CPI increases or some other?
It really is. It's focused around the changes in levels of service that would start occurring at that time. So some things are moving forward in the first couple of years, and then things like the new crew and vehicle start showing up in years 4, 5, 6. So it is a growth pattern over time of additional capacity. So for example, you have an MOU with the county, and that MOU will be up for negotiation, and staff's expectation is the county is going to increase their operating costs to you. And so that's in that additional growth out in year 4, 5, 6 fiscal years out, because you can assume that the county's costs are going up for things like maintenance of the canals and your water quality testing program, things that they're providing for you, as well as just the basic billing services they provide. They do charge you on a per bill basis for carrying the fee through their wastewater billing system, and that agreement also is up for renewal. So I tried to take into consideration all of those things that are out there when your contracted service for sweeping renews, and what would be an expectation for adjustment in bids that you could expect to receive. So it grows as we would anticipate additional cost pressures for the basic services that you're currently providing.
Right, and actually I really appreciate that, because that's a proactive way of modeling and financial planning, right? You're looking forward and trying to set out what your expectations would be 5-10 years down the road, which I think is very important. And I wish that we had done something like that over the last 17 years, because what the situation that we currently find ourselves in is having to make a huge leap forward in order to sort of play catch up with the deteriorating infrastructure that we find throughout our town. So I really thank you for the forecasting and all the work that you've done. I think this is something that really is necessary. We have significant water projects, and we cannot continue to rely upon state funding for these projects. If we get them, that's fantastic. Then we'll just keep building our reserves in case of an emergency. But we need to be able to stand on our own 2 feet and satisfy the needs of our residents without having to require state funding. There was one more thing. In your modeling, there was a component of debt. Was that correct? It was a small amount, but I did see that there was
Yes.
some debt.
As I understand it, there are existing bonds that you're committed to pay off. And so what you see in the model is a debt service charged for those
For current
already.
for current loans.
Yeah. Yes.
Understood.
Exactly.
And that'll be it. Okay. Perfect. That's all I needed to know. Thank you very much again.
Mhm.
I had a question for Ms. Treadway also. Elizabeth, part of what I've seen, and I think this has been part of the discussion, is the change in our water table. You might have touched upon this, but how some of these projects, the capacity or the engineering today, unfortunately, due to those changes underground, the capacity of those stormwater systems, it changes, right? For example,
Yes, it does.
and that's something that has always concerned me. For example, previously, I wish we would have invested in since incorporation, I wish we would have invested in pressurized pipes, in backflow preventers, and things like that. Are those retrofits? Are those numbers included in this calculation?
Actually, I think Carlos is probably better able to answer that question because he provided me with, and I don't mean, I'm not trying to dodge the question. I just think he has a better perspective in being able to answer that.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Mayor, the numbers, the projects and that Elizabeth put together were based on not increasing. I know when we did the stormwater master plan, we provided, when we had the capital projects laid out, the 11 projects, we had 3 types of scenarios. When we did the stormwater master plan, we had a scenario where the groundwater stays where it's at. What happens if the groundwater, which is the numbers that Elizabeth put in the model. But we also in the master plan let's assume that the groundwater raises 6 inches. What would that do to the capital program? And the estimate was a 20% increase in the capital program. What happens if we assume that the groundwater raises 12 inches? That elevated the cost of the CIP program 50%. And that was done during the master plan update. But the numbers that Elizabeth were provided just assumed the normal groundwater elevation.
Got it. No, that's a great explanation, Carlos, and I think that's been part of my concern, because I think we know that all the stormwater projects, even from when developments were built, just say like in the 90s and West Lakes and stuff like that, we know that those were inadequate, that they're already, their capacity has already diminished due to the water table has gone up throughout the last 20 years. I think that's nobody can question that. So I mean, those are just the things that I'm looking at. I mean, I've always been a believer that we should have those pressurized pipes, that we should have the backflow preventers when we go into the outfalls and stuff like that. But that, just want to put that on the record. But yeah, thank you. So it's all based on that, and the stormwater master plan does call for that. So thank you, Carlos. Any other questions? I see the manager with his hand up.
Yeah, I've got a few questions, and this first one, I'm not sure if it'd be best answered by Carlos or by Elizabeth, but was this analysis, did it take into account, because it almost seems like it's a given that our operations needs to be enhanced. The fact that we need a second back truck. Did the analysis that was conducted, Carlos, either by the Stormwater Master Plan or in this analysis, bear out that we need to enhance our operations? Because the operations, I assume, are dictated by the qualities or the demographics of a community. A community like ours that has a heavy canopy needs more operations to vacuum out the storm drains and the catch basins. Some community with fewer trees would need that as often. Did any of the analysis, either in this study or in the Stormwater Master Plan, bear out for sure that we need to increase the operations on the operation side?
Yes, on the analysis that Elizabeth made, those increased level of service were considered. During the Stormwater Master Plan, they also alluded to a lot of these increases. And in fact, on the estimates that they did increase the operation and maintenance costs every year to account for those increases on your just regular operation and maintenance costs.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you very much. Then that has to always be taken into account. The next question, in the Stormwater Master Plan for the next 10 years, we saw the spreadsheet there in Elizabeth's presentation that it's approximately $15 million worth of projects. What would, if we were to have a magic wand and an unlimited bank account, and we were to say, we're going to solve every single drainage problem in the town, what would that equate to? Did the Stormwater Master Plan revision quantify that?
Well, yes, the Stormwater Master Plan gave you three types of costs to manager, but assuming that the groundwater elevation does not, stays where it's at, the cost was estimating at 20 million. So that's how much you would need to get all the projects done and absorb your operation and operation and maintenance cost increase throughout the 10-year period.
Okay, I'm sorry. I got a couple more questions,
Sure,
and then
sure.
I'll shut up. Thank you. That's good information. And maybe this would be more to Elizabeth, but for instance, the rate that we charge our residents through the water and sewer department, does that by law or some other standard have to be the same to all of our residents? Or could we charge some residents one rate and some residents a different rate?
Under actually the history of stormwater utilities within the state of Florida, you would be required really to charge like properties the same rate. So you would have to have a reason to differentiate. There would have to be a substantial and legally sound reason why you would put a different rate on different properties as far as the user fee is concerned. We have seen communities use assessments of different costs to different areas of the community based on improvement to an infrastructure that is benefiting directly those properties. And so the assessment process is quite different than your ongoing monthly charges, quarterly charges, however they're actually billed out. But you would have to have a significant and, again, legally defensible reason why you would charge one resident one value and another resident a different value.
Okay. So if we had a portion of our town that had more of the problems, that would be discriminatory, or that would not be appropriate to charge that area more on this rate versus a different area that may have no or minimal drainage issues?
I think you would find it very difficult to come up with the legal justification for the difference.
Okay.
It is a
Alright.
public system that you're managing. It's not a unique service to that second area, to the area that might have more problems.
Gotcha.
I think it would be
And my-
very difficult.
Okay. So, sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
No. And my final question would be if, for some reason, there was the political will and the voters agreed, if we were to float like $20 million worth in stormwater bonds and then mortgage this out over a 20 or 30 year period, could the stormwater fee be used to retire the stormwater debt service on the bonds?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. It would be appropriate to do so.
Okay. All right. That's it. I'm done. Thank you.
And I can model that if that's a direction that council would like to see what those numbers might look like.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to speak for the council, but I think that the council at some point is going to have to make decisions or make a decision not to decide, not to make any changes. And I think that any and every iota of information would be beneficial for them to have at their disposal so they can have as much information as possible for when they have to make that decision or decide not to decide, either way.
Look, I think quoting Councilman Collazo, we need options. Send us the options. The more options, the better. So, that's great, Elizabeth. Thank you. Thank you very much.
I have a question, Mr. Mayor.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. Elizabeth, several people have made this point that part of the challenge has been that the rate has stayed flat over the past 16 years, 17 years, and it's kind of gotten us to the position that we're in now. Did any of your models include what that rate would have looked like if we would have adjusted for CPI? And do you know if any of those, maybe all of those issues that we have now would have somehow been covered in that? And I'm addressing this question just to the long-term policy with regards to this. If this is something that we should have adjusted on a yearly basis. I'm toying with that right now.
I did not do that. I mean, again, with direction and a request from Carlos, I could establish a model that would answer that question, would at least tell you what the revenue generation capacity could be or could have been on a year-by-year basis. As far as its capacity to meet your program needs, what is unknown is then what might have gotten accomplished over the last 17 years that has not been accomplished. That we can't predict, but I certainly could run the predictive model to tell you what the impact would have been had you done an annualized CPI adjustment or a periodic adjustment of a certain percentage. I certainly could run that calculation if you would like to have that information.
I was just curious because it seems like the crux of the problem, based on some of the dialogue, has been that we haven't necessarily adjusted the rate over time. I just wanted to see what that would have actually bought us during that period of time, because we're toying with the idea of leveraging loans, we're toying with the idea of borrowing money, of increasing this rate. And I want to make sure that if we do that now, we put forward a game plan, that we're not coming back and revisiting this, and maybe we didn't take all these factors into consideration. So I kind of like to look at history and see what we can learn from that, and see how we can adopt a policy that can better serve us over time.
Hey, I have a question, Mr. Mayor. Elizabeth, Elizabeth, I don't know if you mentioned this, but what would the rate be today if we had done a proper raising of the scale, per se, throughout the last 17 years?
Well, I think that's the question that was just asked.
Right. Oh, I think he said value. I'm just trying to figure out what the rate would have been. Did those numbers ever come into play at all?
No, I did not model the past history.
Okay.
I didn't.
All right. Thank you.
As I say, I can do that if that's a desire of the council and staff.
Yeah, I don't know if it's, and I'll leave that up to the manager and Carlos, if it's well looking at how much we spent through grants and the value of the water project and where we should have been and where we should be in reference to the rate, to know how far behind we are. I think it's a good comparison if we had to raise the rate to explain to the residents, listen, we should be at whatever rate, we're only raising it this much just to catch up. And Councilman Collazo said, hit the nail on the head. It is a terrible time to do this. But unfortunately, these projects need to go on, and the damage that's happening to some of these homes is outrageous. And I don't think we can wait another day, especially with hurricane season coming along and the rainy season. So I think that we're already behind the 8 ball. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Uh-huh.
Any other questions? I see none. I think, Carlos, you want to close it out?
Yes, I wanted to really quick ask Elizabeth, is there anything that not yet answered, or any guidance in order to proceed forward and finalize the models and be able to later on, I could come back, the staff can come back to the council with recommendations or something, whether it's the rate stability or what approach do we want to take, or guidance? Is there anything else that you need?
I'm just looking at the list of policies that we talked about to make sure that we've had ample discussion on each one of them.
Because I think that especially the rate stability one, I feel that that's one that is very important. Whether
right.
Whether the model that you have now has it year going up, or are we more inclined of having a rate, fixed rate that will give us that that steady revenue throughout, or when do we think that we want to revise, if we want to keep it fixed and then come back in 4 years, in 5 years. I think these are some of the things that you will need to answer, Elizabeth, in order to utilize the models, correct?
From the standpoint of benchmarking your rate, I believe it's best practice that you do a rate restudy on a routine, periodic basis. I counsel all my communities that this is a formal process. You ought to do this at least every 3 to 4 fiscal years. Again, because of the variability of what happens both in the marketplace, in financial markets, in the condition of your program and advancing it, I really do encourage all of my clients to look at a rate restudy on a routine, periodic basis. The rate model itself is very straightforward. Once it's built, it can be, all the formulas are built within it, and it can be updated in a relatively easy manner. On the issue of the rate stability, what I think I've gotten some feedback on, and that's fairly straightforward for me to be able to do with the cost model, is to offer you some reflection on what happens if. And so I heard interest in what happens from the manager if we debt finance capital. And I can build in this a payback schedule, issuing debt, not necessarily, Mr. Manager, in a $20 million lump sum, but to work with Carlos on when project execution would reasonably sustain issuing bonds. So it could be that it's a $7 million, then a $5 million, and then an $8 million. But we can certainly look at that and be able to do that. I think that the idea of being able to look at whether you do a fixed percent adjustment of the rate annually or whether you establish it for some period of predictability so that rate increases, again, policy is always something you can change. I mean, you need to be able to respond to the energy of various issues that will be before you. So, but I establish the rate now using 3 or 4 year blocks of increases, but I can look at that in different ways and give you those kinds of options so that you can see what happens. I can work with Carlos and adjust the in-house service for an expanded maintenance operation to an outsourced. And so these are options that we can show you. We simply need your direction to say, go ahead, these are the things that we want to see.
All right, thank you, Elizabeth. I think we've got enough guidance, and I'll get with you afterwards.
Carlos, I do have one point that I'd like to add to Elizabeth as we close.
The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Carlos, I heard a couple of my colleagues chime in on fast tracking some of those projects that you said we would be kind of reconvening on over the strategic plan. And I think one of the options that I'd like to see is different instruments on accomplishing those, and maybe not necessarily with a bond instrument. And I know the manager alluded to different mechanisms and even different things that maybe models we haven't discussed here. Like, and I think Councilman Dieguez said, could we appropriate monies from the reserves and maybe even then pay back those monies of the reserves if we wanted to accelerate a particular project on a given year and pay those monies back through the fee. So I don't know if you've discussed those models, Elizabeth, with Carlos, but I'd like to see those options as well, since those may be options that could be part of this the toolbox, so to speak, to address the dynamic needs within our community.
Councilman Collazo, I'll work with Elizabeth and try to incorporate as many of those options as possible in the.
Yeah, before we sign off, and I said I was going to shut up, and I apologize for not sticking to my word. But Elizabeth, if we adjust the rate now, let's say the council takes an action and we adjust the rate to, let's say 50% more, let's say $6, $7 a unit, and we tie it to some benchmark like a CPI. Do you still recommend that we have a rate study every X number of years just to make sure that we're keeping up, that CPI is doing what it's supposed to do? Or once we tie it to a benchmark like that, that we don't necessarily need to do a CPI, or does it have a different frequency?
I think it's best practice always to ground truth where the rate has grown and what you're achieving with it. As much as we have great historical information in our industry, things are going to change, and we know they're going to change. And being able to react to those changes operationally are important. And so always going back and testing your assumptions, making sure that your model factors are still reliable and are predicting what you need them to do, I think is absolutely just critical best practice.
Thank you.
All right, so I don't see any other comments. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, staff, for all your hard work. I think we're all very well versed now as to why it's set at a certain rate and where it needs to be and what happens with the funding. So we really appreciate everybody's feedback, and we'll go on from there. So thank you, guys. Council, anything else? If not, we're going to be logging off. Seeing none.
Thank you, guys. Very informative.
What's that?
Thank you. Very informative.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a good night. See you at the council
Good night.
meeting.